Why is the ice type so fragile? Has it ever had a chance to shine defensively? Not quite, but we're here today to figure out just how bad they are on defense. Now, in my most recent video, I had briefly discussed a very simple algorithm to judge a Pokemon's type defensively. The basics are as follows. A 4 times weakness is minus 2 points, a 2 times weakness is minus 1 point, neutral types are 0, 2 times resistances are 1, 4 times resistances are 2, and immunities are 2. This simple algorithm can then be used to judge every dual type combination defensively. As I discussed in my last video, a pure steel typing has a base total of 9. Ice, on the other hand, has a defensive point total of -3. Now, having 4 weaknesses on its own isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, both grass and rock have 5 total weaknesses to Ice's 4. Ice's real downfall is its lack of resistances. On top of that, Ice shares a weakness to fighting and fire with Steel. And as Steel is the best typing defensively, most teams you face are bound to have multiple sources of fighting or fire coverage. Also, in the makings of this video series, I realized something interesting about the math behind all of these combinations of types. Mathematically, combining 2 types together simply means adding the 2 types' individual type scores together, except in the cases where immunities override its partner's type weaknesses or resistances. So I've also added a meta defensive score that takes into account common offensive type weaknesses and resistances. Types that resist common offensive types get a small buff to their original 1 point, and types that are weak to common types have their score lessened slightly. Essentially, it's a weighted average, and it's still in the works, so don't yell at me for it being confusing. With that being said, let's start off our discussions with the dual type of Ice and Psychic. Technically speaking, this would be the lowest ranking dual type combination at number 18 with a total point value of -4. Ice and Psychic have a total of 1 shared weakness or resistance in fighting. The rest of their weaknesses are compounded together to create a massive 6 total 2 times weaknesses with only 2 resistances. Those resistances are not even super valuable. Psychic in the current type chart is very low tier. The Ice resistance is a little bit better as Ice has some value offensively, but since the introduction of Fairy, Ice's niche as a dragon killer has fallen significantly. Additionally, its weakness to Ghost, Dark, Fire, Rock all leave it very little room to survive common threats. Ironically, one of my favorite Pokemon ever, Mr. Rhyme, has this typing. Back in Gen 8, the only generation it was available, I got to use it in the Dynamax format to huge potential. However, I'll save my fascination for this Pokemon for a future video. Now, to talk about the defensive juggernaut elephant in the room, or should I say horse, Calyrex Ice is legitimately amazing at what it does for VGC teams. The addition of Terra typings in Gen 9 allowed for Calyrex Ice to drop all of its weaknesses in favor of a better defensive typing, while keeping its massive lance wall-breaking stab in check. Also, the fact that it has 150 defense and 130 special defense also helps. Next of the dual ice types, we have Ice and Rock. If you remember the Steel type video, Rock defensively shares many similarities with both Steel and Ice. Compounding the fighting and Steel weaknesses with Ice is especially bad, but adding more weaknesses to ground, water, and grass makes a great case for one of the worst typings ever. For resistances, Flying and Ice and Normal are okay, but these resistances aren't going to lift this typing out of the abyss. Aurorus, one of the only Pokemon with this typing, is incredible thematically, but suffers from middling stats and this horrid typing. If only this were a video discussing the best designed Pokemon from each of these typings. The only other Ice-Rock type is Hisuian Avalugg, which, much like regular Avalugg, is a defensive wall. Unfortunately, its special defense and attacking stats don't make up for its poor typing and offensive capabilities. Last of the -4 point total combinations, we have Ice and Grass. This is another example of a type combination that simply doesn't help each other out defensively. Ice helps with Grass's Ice weakness, but the rest of their weaknesses make it weak to a whopping 8 total types, nearly half of all types in the game. On top of that, it has a quad weakness to Fire. Of the 6 2 times weaknesses though, only half of them, Fighting, Flying, and Rock, are really worth mentioning, as Poison, Bug, and Steel are some of the worst offensive types. Grass also provides 4 total resistances in Ground, Water, Grass, and Electric. All of those resistances are useful in the right circumstances. Abomasnow is probably the key Pokemon you think of when you think of Ice Grass. Unfortunately, Abomasnow has some of the worst stat spreads I've ever seen. Its Mega Evolution in Gen 6 doesn't help either. I will mention though that being able to set Hail or Snow is unique and adds some fantastic defensive utility on the physical side. It'd be interesting to see if Mega Abomasnow gets a little better with Snow's 1.5 defensive buff. Fighting defensively is as close to average as you can get, 3 weaknesses, 3 resistances. Weak to Fairy and Flying isn't great, but Dark and Rock resistances are solid. Unfortunately, when you add this typing to Ice, Fighting's resistance to Rock is neutralized, and the rest of the weaknesses and resistances are added together, resulting in a Pokemon that's weak to 6 types, only resisting 3. Those resistances aren't great either in the grand scheme of things. The only Pokemon with this typing, Crabominable, also doesn't show this type any favors defensively. 43 speed and middling bulk means it will faint to any strong super effective move. Its base HP of 97 is the only saving grace defensively. Steel and Bug are interesting types because they only have 1 total 4 times weakness. Ice and Bug are similarly interesting with only 4 total weaknesses, though 2 of those are 4 times. However, this typing resists ground, grass, and ice, making it somewhat respectable as far as ice types go. If well positioned, this type could actually be incredibly good as a pure offensive pivot Pokemon with stab U-turns. Think like an offensive Weavile or Qianpao, but more pivot and positioning. Frostmoth is one of my favorite Pokemon from Sword and Shield, and for good reason. Stat-wise, you may think this spread is pretty middling, but thanks to its Ice Scale's ability having special damage, it can be kinda difficult to take down by a special attacker. Plus, access to Quiver Dance allows it to build up stat boosts and eventually hit things with a strong Ice Beam. The requirement to run heavy-duty boots and avoid 2 separate types with the 4 times weaknesses make it difficult to justify running, however, without Terra support. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, Ice defensively is the worst type when comparing total weaknesses to total resistances defensively. And since I've already mentioned the type profile, I will talk about 1 or 2 of the Pokemon in this tier. Pure Ice types defensively don't have a great track record. Avalugg sits strong with its massive 184 defense stat and access to Rapid Spin and Recover. Cryogonal also is a special wall capable of walling key threats in singles with good speed too. Glaceon and Glastrier are also fairly strong solo ice types with decent bulk. I can't say many of these types have ever had incredible success, however. At -2 points, we have Ice Dark. Weavile and Qianpao, the only 2 Ice Dark types, are incredibly fast sweepers that fail to benefit from their typing's defensive benefits. Ice and Dark fold to fighting types, and tack on weaknesses to Fairy, Fire, and Rock, which makes it incredibly easy to take them down. Early in Gen 9, Fluttermane ran rampant on VGC teams, OHKOing Qianpao cores if they didn't run Focus Sash. As this video is intended to discuss defensive benefits of the typing, I will refrain from mentioning the true benefits of either of these Pokemon offensively. They're both known to fold in single super effective hits, rarely having the bulk or typing to survive something like a Makuhita close combat. Fun calculation for you. Makuhita can take 4 entire Icicle crashes from Qianpao while stealing close to 600% of its health via close combat. This Pokemon is cherry-picked to showcase Ice Dark's weakness, but alas. Ice Normal is the next -2 pointer. This typing has all of Ice's normal weaknesses, which is already bad, but it kinda makes up for it with the Ghost immunity. Good pivoting around fighting types would allow this type to shine. As Fighting and Rock types are heavily physical already, and Fire Steel are mixed usually, this typing could be a real menace as a pure special wall. Cryogonal is probably a good comparison since there are currently no normal ice types. Cryogonal can take special hits extremely well and fire back with semi-powerful freeze dries. If tacked on to the normal typing, it could also be immune to ghost types, allowing it to wall even more. Cracking into the top 10 of the defensive ice dual types, we have Ice and Ground. This typing also has a -2 point total, but each covered the other's weaknesses semi-decently. Ice's rock weakness is covered by ground, and ground's ice weakness is covered by ice. This leaves the combo weak to fighting, steel, fire, water, and grass, while still resisting poison and being immune to electric. This typing won't resist much defensively, but the immunity could provide it certain unique niches against electric types. Also, ground and ice is an amazing offensive combination, hitting everything for at least neutral damage. Mamoswine is the key Pokemon for this typing. With a very respectable base 110 HP and medium defensive stats, it can maybe live a strong super effective hit, especially if it's from a fire type, with aid from its thick fat ability. Mamoswine has some success in past generations VGC too, although it's mostly known for its offensive prowess rather than any defensive benefits. Right below Ice and Ground, we have Ice Dragon. Dragon provides key resistances to elemental types, including turning off Ice's weakness to fire. In generations prior to the introduction of Fairy typing in Gen 6, this type would have a very solid and respectable 4 weaknesses to 3 resistances. Unfortunately, with the added Fairy weakness, this type has faltered a little, but is still very solid. I believe both Ice Dragon Pokemon, Kyurem and Baxcalibur, have been banned from OU in singles at some point. Both have incredible stat lines and access to some very offensive move pools, including Earth Power or Earthquake, on top of their normal Ice and Dragon moves. Next up, we have the Ice and Flying types. This typing doubles up on a Rock weakness, but removes key weaknesses of Ice and Fighting from either type. 4 total weaknesses and 2 resistances plus an immunity make this typing very good in the right circumstances defensively. As an example, Articuno in Gen 9 achieved moderate success spamming Blizzard with the help of Gen 9's Snow buff, Snow Cloak, and Blizzard's 100% accuracy in a snowstorm. This isn't even to mention how difficult it can be to remove Articuno normally thanks to its very high defensive stats totaling over 300 of its stat points. Base Charizard can barely 2KO Articuno with how especially bulky it is, making it especially hard to take down if any of these attacks miss due to Snow Cloak. Ice Electric also has a net -1 stat total, but in total has 4 weaknesses and 3 resistances. Its weaknesses may be common, but there's a reason Bolt Beam is naturally one of the best type combinations offensively. Unfortunately, this video will not be discussing the offensive nature of the Bolt Beam combo, and instead be focusing on defensive benefits, where there are little of. Nearly all of its weaknesses are very commonly subsidized with physical moves, so if there's ever a time to be a special wall for an Ice type, it'd be now. Let's talk about the only Ice Electric type, Arctozolt. Coming out of Gen 8, this Pokemon was seen as extremely gimmicky. However, it soon broke through any barriers protecting it thanks to its incredible offensive presence in snow teams with its Bolt Beak and Ice type combo. But again, many of this type's strengths exist solely on the offensive spectrum, and this type is expected to see very little benefit defensively. Now here's an example of how Ice types can really benefit from Water types defensively. Water removes Ice's weakness to Fire and Steel, while only adding weaknesses to Grass and Electric. This leaves a unique defensive profile. Weaknesses to Rock, Fighting, Grass, and Electric can be somewhat hard to come by as common coverage moves. Plus, Ice covers the Grass weakness by threatening Grass types back. Fun little stat for you. There were 3 different Ice Waters in Gen 1 as compared to 3 total non-Gen 1 Ice Water types. Lapras is probably the best example of a bulky water ice type, and it saw pretty good use of its typing in Gen 8 VGC. Dynamax Lapras could set Aurora Veil for 5 turns with its G-Max Resonance move, further increasing its bulk. It could also run the Weakness Policy item, punishing foes with strong super effective attacks by doubling its damage output. The doubling of its HP also made it a behemoth to take down. Strong Bandit or Spect attacks could still do the trick too, but those are more easy to play around. Now into the top 5 types. Also the first typing with a net 0 point total, Fire bevies of resistances really help Ice out in a good way. Quad resisting Ice and 2 times resists to Fairy, Grass, and Bug are fantastic. This type combination does have a quad weakness to Rock, but the other 2 times weaknesses can be managed. Not to mention, this type can really shine offensively, so it's a pretty decent combination. Technically speaking, there's been an Ice Fire type with Galarian Darmanitan's hidden ability, but it only gains the Fire type at half health. And since Ice is already a frail type and Darmanitan is already a frail Pokemon, this was extremely outshined by its other ability, Guerrilla Tactics, but I won't get into the offensive nature of that ability in this video. Oh, how I wish for this to be a viable Ice Fire type to play around with. Poison's whopping 5 resistances to 2 weaknesses complements Ice exceedingly well. Together they make a type combination very similar to Steel Poison, not to mention that this weakness to Psychic and Steel are generally manageable, and the resistance to Fairy is where the defensive typing could really shine. If a Pokemon with this typing were to exist, I'm sure it could actually perform decently well. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist yet, so maybe we'll see in the next generation. Ice Fairy also has a total point value of 0, but it combines the best attributes of both Fairy and Ice types into one amazing type both defensively and offensively. Offensive Steel and Poison moves are hard to come by, so realistically it will go down to Fire and Rock types most of the time. But in Alolan Ninetales case, the ability to set Snow, set up a fast Aurora Veil, and being generally specially tanky made it so this Pokemon is actually a defensive powerhouse. I will also say this comes with a little bias, as Alolan Ninetales is one of my favorite Pokemon ever, behind Mr. Rhyme the Goat, but I'll get into that at another date. Right before number 1, we have Ice and Ghost. This shouldn't surprise you, but removing Ice's fighting weakness and turning it into an immunity is just about the best thing you can do for the Ice type. Not to mention the other defensive benefits of the Ghost typing, also bringing along normal immunity and resistances to Poison and Bug. Frostlass does well with this typing, but with nearly every single stat on Frostlass being a 70 or 80, this typing could really use a better frontrunner to showcase its niche uses defensively. Finally, we have number 1, Ice and Steel. I talked a little more in depth about this in the last video, but Steel really is the best type defensively, so this being here at number 1 shouldn't surprise anyone. These two types really compound weaknesses, but mathematically they still have the best profile of resistances. Shout out to the only evolution line for this crew, Alolan Sandslash. And that's a wrap on Ice type's frosty fate in the world of Pokemon defense. It's safe to say this type is always skating on thin ice defensively, but hey, just because it's brittle doesn't mean it's useless. Ice still has offensive power and some standout Pokemon that manage to thrive in spite of the odds. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more type analyses, and let me know in the comments, do you think the Ice type deserves a buff? Or is it destined to stay so awkward defensively? Thanks for watching, stay cool out there, trainers.